Que nos acompanham neste programa Nano Alerta, hoje no seu número 118. Fazemos este programa dedicado ao público não especialista, porque é este público que no Brasil. Também fazemos este programa porque é aqui que nós podemos discutir os impactos da nanotecnologia na sociedade, no meio ambiente, na economia, na ética, na saúde, na medicina, coisa que não são discutidas. Por fim, fazemos este programa porque acreditamos que ser livre é ser bem informado e a divulgação científica contribui e colabora para o aprofundamento da democracia e da cidadania no Brasil. Hoje, entrevistado desde a Holanda, professor Robert, Dr. Robert, com quem nós vamos ter o prazer de ouvi-lo sobre nanotecnologia aplicado à nanomedicina. Okay, Robert, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Paulo. Thank you for inviting me on the show. My name is Robert Geertsma. I am a senior scientist at the National Institute for Public Health and the Environment in the Netherlands. It's also known with the abbreviation RIVM. I've worked there for almost 22 years now. I'm a senior scientist and mainly responsible for giving scientific advice to regulators in our ministry or in our inspectorates. My main fields are related to medical technology and to nanomedicine. That means nanotechnology applied to both medicinal products and medical devices. I'm also one of the experts of the so-called RISCOS of Nanotechnology Knowledge and Information Center, the Nano, which we have at our institute, and which is sort of an observatory for our national government, providing also advice to the various departments in our government. I'm also participating regularly in various standards working groups and technical committees. I'm chairing the Sense and Technical Committee on Quality Management and other horizontal subjects like risk management in medical devices. And I'm also the co-chair of the ISO TC 194 Working Group 17, which is writing a technical report on biological evaluation of medical devices and specifically related to nanomaterials. Furthermore, I also frequently represent the Dutch government in working groups of the European Commission. I'm the chair of the so-called New and Emerging Technologies Working Group, the NET Working Group, and I'm a member of the International Pharmaceutical Regulators Forum Nanomedicine Working Group that was recently installed. Furthermore, obviously we also do our own research here at the Institute. We publish it in RIVM reports, and we also regularly publish in scientific journals. And we participate in European projects in relation to nanotechnology and also other topics, of course.
Yes, very good CV. Long time of work.
Thank you. Yes.
You can start your presentation. The first slide is in the screen.
Okay. This this is the title slide. As you can see, I will present now on nanotechnology in medical devices, a horizon scan, and also talk about risk assessment. If you go to the next slide,
Yes.
you see, I don't know if everyone in the audience is aware, but medical devices is a very wide range of products and technologies, and also very diverse types of products. For example, it can be surgical instruments or wheelchairs. It can be MRI scanners, or it can be hip implants, or pacemakers, or even some tests, for example, to determine pregnancy. All this is medical devices. The purpose of medical devices can be therapy, it can be diagnosis, it can be monitoring, or even prevention of disease, or sometimes a combination of these. Medical devices can be invasive or non-invasive. They can be used and get in touch with all kinds of different tissues. And also in many of these devices nowadays, nanomaterials or other types of nanotechnologies are increasingly used. Furthermore, in contrast with, for example, medicinal products, where it's usually one type of disease that is treated with a medicinal product, for medical devices, all medical disciplines probably can benefit. And there was no overview available of nanomedical devices in the literature. So we got a request from the Dutch Ministry of Health and the Dutch Inspectorate for Healthcare to provide such an overview and to look at availability of nanomedical devices, their benefits and their risks, specifically related to the nano aspect. What kind of methods did we use? We decided to look at the literature and use some of the available databases. In particular, we used databases from the American FDA, from Health Canada, clinical trials databases, and patents databases. And we decided to categorize our results by medical specialism. Furthermore, it's important to acknowledge that we excluded the use of nanotechnologies in computer chips, because, that would mean that any medical device in which there is a computer chip would also be a nanomedical device. And especially in the context of risk assessment, that's quite a different aspect that we did not want to address that. So in the next slide,
Yes.
you can see a snapshot of the report. On the bottom of the screen, you can see the internet address where it can be freely downloaded. So anyone who is interested to read the entire report, you can find it at this web address. Next slide, please.
Yes.
So the first medical discipline that I would like to discuss is cardiology. And in this slide, you see only a number of examples of products that are CE marked. CE marked means that they are allowed on the European market. So you can see there are a number of different devices. Can be pacemaker leads, can be stents, both bare metal stents and drug-eluting stents. Can be the balloons for dottering, and it can be combinations. And what you see as the common aspects in relation to nanotechnology is that it is the coating. They all have some kind of nano coating on the particular product. And a special example is the one on the bottom, intravascular guide wires. In this case, the nanomaterial is an iron oxide particle which is embedded actually in the guide wire. And so the guide wire is used, for example, when there will be a dottering procedure or a stent placement. And because there are these iron oxide markers it can be made visible under real-time imaging where exactly the guide wire is, so if you're already at the place where you need to place the stent. So next slide.
Please, could you tell me some names of the company that produce this?
Well, they're actually on the slide. If you see the leads, companies like Safio and Biotronic. The stents is Medica in Turkey, or Hexacat in France, or My Stent in the USA. If you look at the bottom, you see that the company is Nano for Imaging. So for all of the examples, also the names of the manufacturer, that's the last item on the entry.
Okay, but there is no monopoly of one company. Is the concurrence is okay in this sector?
Yes, there's no monopoly. No. For medical devices, it's not always covered completely with patents like for medicinal products. There are of course patents, but there is a lot of room for new players on the market.
Okay, is the interventional radiology the slide now?
Next slide, interventional radiology. Yes. So as you can see, interventional radiology has some of the same purposes as the cardiology I showed you, but it's not close to the heart, but it's in other parts of the body. And you see it's the same kind of products, and also the nano aspects is again the coating. So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this slide unless you have questions. Otherwise we can go to the next slide.
Okay. Dentistry.
Yes, dentistry is an interesting sector in relation to application of nanotechnologies. If you calculate or count the number of individual products that are nanotechnology enabled within medical devices on the market in the EU, then the dentistry is the largest sector. So I list again a number of examples. These are data that were estimated by the Association of the European Dental Industry. So you can see it's a different type of products. It's impression materials, but it's also the composites. Previously you had fillings placed based on mercury, amalgam, and now you have these composites which are about the same color as your own teeth, but in order to make them with the right kind of properties, they are composed of various types of particles, and there are a number of particles in the nano range. You can also see for yourself the rest of the examples: bonding agents, cements, but also materials for temporary crowns and bridges, and also some artificial teeth. In this later category, the nano aspects will probably be again some sort of coating on the artificial tooth, because actually that's also sort of an implant, an artificial tooth.
Yes, this is a very surprise for me, the quantity of dental products in the market.
Yes, that was also a surprise for me, but these are the numbers from the industry association. So I think they are the best placed to estimate the numbers of different products that they have on the EU market.
Okay, the next is the screen, neurology.
Yes, the next discipline is neurology or neurosurgery. In this case, you may notice that they are not examples of products that are actually CE marks, so that are on the European market. because we did not identify any products in the neurology discipline that were already on the market, but we think it's important to mention anyway. As an example, you see that there's a lot of work going on to create visual prosthesis to repair the retina, and the components are getting smaller and smaller, and actually there is an electro array used where there is nanocrystalline diamond components. An important example of a manufacturer is in Israel, Bioretina and Nanoretina Incorporated. Another one is nano electromechanical system, which is you can monitor the pressure inside the cranium, so inside the head where the brain is, and you can do measurement also of the cerebral spinal fluid pulsality. So this is important for people with problems of the brain. Quite a different type of example is related to electrospun scaffolds. The other ones above here all are benefiting from also electronic or electrical properties enabled by nanotechnology. And this example is a different one. This is a scaffold which can be used for neural tissue repair. So if a nerve is cut, then there can be a scaffold built, which is made by the technique of electrospinning, and this is then a conduit for the nerve tissue to grow back together. This is also a technology that is quite promising, I think.
And the companies are the same of the cardiology, or here is another companies?
There are other companies.
Another companies. Okay.
Yes, you see on the example of the retina prosthesis, there are some companies listed.
Mm-hmm.
And for the other examples, that's mainly still in the development stage, also with academic groups at universities, and it's farther away from the market, so we decided not to mention any companies there.
Okay. The next, oncology.
Yes, oncology is, of course, a very important medical discipline in relation to nanotechnology. If you look at the medicinal products that are enabled by nanotechnology, then I think 60% or 70% of all the medicinal products are in the oncology field. For medical devices, it's different. It's in volume, it's a lot smaller in relation to the other disciplines. However, there are a number of devices also that need to be mentioned. For example, the in vitro diagnostic medical devices making use of biomarkers, for example, to detect prostate-specific antigen or circulating tumor cells to get early detection of tumors. Also, for this latter cause, to create or to detect CTCs, there is a device that can actually measure in the bloodstream in a human being, so in vivo. In the next example, immobilization device, that's quite a different example because, as you know, during radiotherapy, the person has to be immobilized because you have to be sure that the radiotherapy touches only the tumor, and if the person moves, then it will hit healthy tissue. For example, in the head, it's even more important that you don't miss, and there is this is a kind of device where the nano aspect makes it very thin, but very strong also for this case. A very important example is also thermotherapy. These are again iron oxide particle, and they can be used to treat tumors. In this case, they can be brought with either with a cannula. You directly put them inside the tumor, or they can be injected intravenously, and they will reach the tumor after a while. Once they are there, which can be checked using MRI imaging, then it is possible to place the patient in a alternating magnetic field, and as a result the iron oxide particles will heat up, and this can be used either as a secondary method to have, for example, chemotherapy become more effective, or if you heat up the particles even more, you will get thermoablation, which means that the tumor cells basically die because of exposure to the heat. The last example on this slide is on the localization of sentinel lymph node. This is used as a surgical tool. If the surgeon decides to cut away a tumor, they always have to check whether the tumor has not spread to the draining lymph nodes which are close to the tumor. And using this material, the surgeon can check actually during the surgery where the sentinel lymph node is, so whether he has to go and also excise that.
Okay.
Next slide.
Next, orthopedics.
Or you have a question?
No, about this, no.
Okay.
Yes.
Next medical discipline is orthopedics. You see a couple of different types of nanotechnology application there. First of all, it's for bone replacement. Bone is made for a large part of hydroxyapatite and tricalcium phosphate, and if you make a nanoparticle formulation of this, you can repair bones. For example, if there had been a tumor inside a bone and it has been taken out, then there is a large hole which will not be repaired by the body without help. And if you put this kind of material in there, which mimics the bone, then the bone cells will grow back into it. Also for orthopedic implants, again, nanotechnology is used to put coatings, which will lead to a better biocompatibility, so better integration of the implant with the surrounding tissue. Various types of coatings, both hydroxyapatite again, or also titanium dioxide has been known to be used. On the other hand, another type of application is again to create a scaffold, similar to what I explained for neurology. Now also a scaffold which resembles cartilage can be made for knee repair, so that the body's own cells will then grow into the scaffold and repair the knee. The final example on the bottom is a metal implant, which is actually has a nano structure with regard to the material phases. It's a bit complicated perhaps to explain, but this is just a bulk material, and the inside structure is extra strong because of the nano arrangement.
And this is using now, it's kind of the replacement.
Well, the bone replacement materials are on the market, and also the implant surface coatings are quite often used. Actually, I'm not sure whether the cartilage scaffold is still used, but I think it's on. It is CE marked. It can be on the market, and the one on the bottom is certainly a product on the market.
Very good. The next is surgery.
Yes, surgery is, I think, an interesting example, you would not think that there might also be nanotechnology, but for example, surgical blades have been made which are very, very sharp, and especially, for example, in ophthalmology, where you have make very precise incision without making a rough edge. Then this kind of diamond-coated blade can be used, but also nanotechnology is used to create hemostasis by making a scaffold out of nanofibers, such as the company 3D Matrix does in the USA.
Okay. Next is test tube.
Yes, the next category is not purely a medical discipline, but we decided to put it as a separate category. What is one of the best known nanomaterials, I think, in all kinds of applications is nano silver, and it can be used in your socks to create anti-odor effects. But also in medical textile, it is used for its antibacterial properties. For example, in the operating theater, this can be used, and there are techniques so that the silver particle will be attached or will be actually embedded in the textile fibers. For also wound care products, make use of the antibacterial properties of nano silver. Especially for large wounds or severe wounds, like for burn patients or for people with diabetic ulcers. This is important that there will be no infection in the wound. Furthermore, also for creating wound dressings, the previously mentioned technique, electrospinning, is used to create a tissue, a structure where the body can send their own cells and materials, and the wound will heal better. So there are a number of companies which are listed here, which are also bringing these kind of products on the market.
And when you clean in washing machine, what occurs with the silver particles?
Yeah, that depends on the technology, how the silver has been incorporated into the textile. In the earlier applications, it was quite loosely in the structure, and after a few times washing, the silver would have disappeared. But now better production methods have been developed, where the silver particles are actually entwined into the textile fibers, so it will stay there for a longer time.
Okay. The next is in vitro molecular diagnostics.
Yes, many people may not realize, but also in vitro diagnostic devices are medical devices. In the area of microarrays, the well-known gene chip is using nanostructures inside to be able to do the analysis. Lab on a chip is a technology which brings enormous possibility in combination with microfluidics. You may have heard about this. This is one area which we briefly mentioned in our 2015 report, but we did not elaborate much, because in 2013 we did a report especially on companies that are bringing lab-on-a-chip devices to the market. You can see the number of the report and the name of the first author. If you go to the website of RIVM, then you will be able to find this report as well, if you're interested in the range of products that are enabled by lab-on-a-chip technology. And it can be as diverse as using it for blood glucose measurements, or for example measuring lithium blood levels, which is important for people who are suffering from bipolar disorder, so who are manic depressive people. They are on medication which needs to be very precisely dosed, and these kinds of measurements can help the patient to do that.
And what will be the impact of the laboratory that now is making the analysis of this that could be or is doing by the lab on chip?
Well, I think part of the job of people working in the laboratories may change. You need to be aware that for the most exact analysis, usually you still need the big laboratory. But these devices that are smaller, that can be used with the patient at the point of care, actually in the physician's office or closer at home even, but they still need to be regularly checked, maintained, and the users of these devices need to get training. So I have seen regional initiatives in the Netherlands where the people from the clinical and analytical chemistry laboratory in the hospital would have a system where they support the people at the general practitioner's office who have to do these measurements, and also people, for example, who have problems with their blood clotting. There are special services for that who are training the patients to use the device. So it may change a little bit the way of working, but it's still very important that they keep on working.
Okay. The next is Zagraf.
Yes. As I told in the beginning, we also looked in clinical trials databases for devices that are not on the market yet, but which are in clinical trials. We looked back and we found out that the first time we could identify a nanomedical device in a clinical trial was in 2003. And then from 2006, more and more devices entered into clinical trials. And we also looked at the discipline in which they were used, and you can see that like with the number of products on the market, we also found the highest number of trials in relation to dentistry. Interestingly, for oncology, which had a relatively low number of products, we still found a relatively high number of clinical trials. So I assume that for medical devices, also oncology is an area of growing importance. Well, you can also see the other ones. Orthopedics has a relatively low number, but that may be because they are the products have been on the market for a longer time already.
Okay.
If you go to the next graph,
You
then you see
patent.
Yeah, you see that we looked at the European patent database, and we also did a search there on nanomedical devices. And we found that about 5 years before the first clinical trial, there was a patent that we could identify for nanotechnology in medical devices. It was not the same device, I must say, but also here you see that a few years later, more and more patents are starting to appear. By the way, you need to realize these databases, both the clinical trials and the patent databases, are not designed to search for nanotechnology enabled devices. So we had to use different code names or different search terms, but probably we will not we have not found all the entries that are in the database, because it's not one of the special fields in the database, whether it's a nano application.
Okay. The next, again, European patent, but another way to see this.
Yes, in the next slide you can see the patent applications per medical discipline. And you see that cardiology and dentistry and diagnostics are relatively large, orthopedics a little bit less. But we also decided to make the category for surface modification coatings, which is used in several disciplines, as you have seen. And we found out that indeed this is the highest number of patents that we can see, so there's a lot of development going on in that area. Next slide.
Okay.
So I've now mainly spoken about the benefits and the availability of devices, so I'll give you a brief summary of that. I think you can say that nanotechnology use in medical devices is a growing area, given by the number of patents and clinical trials and products on the markets that are increasing. Dentistry has by far the largest number of individual products, and one of the most important types of nanotechnology applied for medical devices is the modification of the surface, either by etching or by applying a coating onto it. It's used in multiple medical disciplines, and the benefits of this is basically to increase the biocompatibility of the device with the surrounding tissue. The benefits of coatings can also be if there are, for example, nano silver particles inside, which create an antimicrobial effect. Next slide.
Yes.
Another type of nano application is mimicking the naturally occurring structures of the body. So you've seen that with the fillers for both the dental field and in orthopedics, where you make the kind of material that resembles bone material or tooth material, and in this way it's possible to optimize the biological, physical, mechanical, but also especially for dentistry that's important, the aesthetic characteristics, so that it resembles human tissues. Furthermore, in cardiology and neurology, especially the electrical and magnetic properties of nanomaterials are exploited. This can lead to a better bioelectrical interface, used, for example, in the visual prosthesis to repair the retina, or also in battery technology. For example, in a pacemaker, if you have a battery which has a longer lifetime, then you do not have to change it for a long while, which is obviously an advantage. In oncology, there is actually the use of free nanomaterials. Most of the previous examples, the nanomaterials are not actually free. For oncology, you see that this is basically the way nanotechnology is used. Next slide.
Yes.
If you look overall to the field of medicine, then I think it's safe to say that nanotechnology is expected, or even is already having, a great impact on many areas. And you can see the list of various disciplines underneath. Also drug delivery, like I said, which is not actually the topic of this report, but I thought I should mention it here anyway. And also nanotechnology can change healthcare in more fundamental ways. You actually have quite novel methods for diagnosis and therapy, which can lead, for example, also to the kind of point of care and fast testing that I showed you with the little devices, and which may always gives the possibility also to tailor the therapy more to the patient's profile. So that's personalized medicine.
And you believe that the costs of this change of healthcare will be more expensive or will be more cheap?
That's a very good question. I think it's quite difficult to say. As with most new technologies, the introduction of such a technology, the development at first will cost a lot of money, In the beginning, it may also be a more expensive way to use it, but on the other hand, it makes possible to have less days in the hospital, perhaps prevent other diseases. So it is quite a complicated calculation to make the balance. Some aspects will make the medicine or the healthcare more expensive, and other aspects will make it less expensive. So I don't dare to say which is the overall effect.
Okay, the next. Another graph.
Next.
Nanomedicine, yes. New opportunities, also new risk.
Yes, unfortunately, if you have new technologies, which brings the greatest opportunities, often this also introduces the possibility that new risks can occur. And especially if you look at nanomaterials, you see at the bottom of the picture various types of nanomaterials that are often used, and at the top of the picture above the scale you see that the biological structures that we also have in our body, and you can see that the area which is mostly attributed to nano, which is from 1 to 100 or sometimes a little bit bigger, that is also the area where there are structures inside your cells, so at subcellular level. So such particles can then theoretically reach these structures and have interaction, which creates the risks of adverse effects. So if we go to the next slide.
Yes.
Then I've listed a number of bullet points to explain that the evaluation of the safety and the risk assessment of nanomaterials is not so easy. First of all, if you compare it with substances that can be dissolved, there is a lot larger diversity in nanomaterials. They can be organic, they can be inorganic, they can be a composite, they can be coated, they can be partly soluble, or they can agglomerate or aggregate together. There can be different sizes, there can be different stability, there can be interactions with the kind of matrix that they're in. For medical products, that means whether you insert it into the blood or into muscular tissue, there can be different kind of interactions which can all introduce changes. There's quite a range of different quality of nanomaterials. You have to make sure for medical purposes that you have a consistent quality. There are changes to be made for test protocols. So there's many factors with all kinds of varying effects. And although the knowledge is increasing, science is learning a lot about these aspects, there are still knowledge gaps in relation to this. If you look at the next slide,
no,
you see
I would like to suggest you to put another point in this slide. It's about the budget for new knowledge about these topics that you put here, and the budget that the European community and the United States put for new knowledge in science of production.
well,
If you compare the budget for new knowledge in science of production is I don't know, 100 times more than the budget for new knowledge in this aspect of the risk assessment.
well, I don't know the relation, the ratio between the budgets, but I do know that, well, at least in Europe, products or projects that are funded by European money and that investigate nano always have to look also at the safety, and especially for medical products. the benefit-risk ratio has to be determined. So also in European project, that is what is being done.
Okay, the next is complexity of nanomaterials.
Yes, I introduced an additional slide which explains a little bit more about the complexity. Like I said previously, there is more variation possible in physicochemical parameters that can affect both the exposure to the particle, but also the kinetics inside the body and the hazard of a material than if you compare it with normal chemicals. And this is a list of physicochemical parameters that may affect such very important aspects as the exposure, the kinetics, and the hazards. And if you look at the next slide,
Yes, it's about size.
I show you the result of an investigation we did, we published in 2008, where we looked at the effect of size in the distribution of gold nanoparticles. This was an experiment in rats where we introduced particles of 4 different sizes intravenously, and afterwards we measured where they had ended up, and you can see that most of the particles ended up in the liver and in the spleen. Some of them were still in the blood, but interestingly you can see that the smallest particles were much more widespread. They had also reached other organs in higher numbers than the bigger particles. So there is an effect of size on the tissue distribution.
Yeah, I think this is very important. The size is important.
Yeah. And if you go to the next slide.
Yes, effect of coating.
Yes, this is another experiment we did in our group together with the University of Twente in the Netherlands, where we had gold nano rods, and some of them just had an anticoagulant substance around it, so which prevented the aggregation or agglomeration of the rods, and others had a coating of polyethylene glycol on them. And if you compare the slides or the numbers with the red circles around it, you can see that the ones with the anticoagulation product, the CTAP gold, the organ where the highest exposure takes place is the liver, but for another coating, the spleen is the organ with the highest exposure dose. So that's an example of what the coating can have as an influence on the response by the body. And next slide.
Yes.
Is a more general representation of how to do risk assessment of nanomedical devices. And this slide and also the next number of slides is, well, of course, we have a chapter on this in our RIVM report, but much of the information also in that chapter was inspired by a scientific opinion that was published also in 2015 from the Scanier. You can see the internet address at the bottom. Scanier is the scientific committee for emerging and newly identified health risks, and they wrote an opinion on the risk assessment of nanomedical devices. Me and my colleague Wim de Jong were part of the working group that wrote this document. So you can understand that we use the same approach also in the report we wrote for our own institute. So as a start, it's important to realize that the risk assessment for nanomedical devices, that is medical devices enabled by nanotechnology, is the same as for other medical devices. And the different aspects is you have to take into account the specific characteristics of nanomaterials that I have explained just at the previous slides. So what do you need to know? What do you need to determine? You have to do a detailed physical-chemical characterization and identification of nanomaterials. And in case there can be a release of such nanomaterials from the device, you have to do toxicokinetic studies to determine where the particles may go in the body. Furthermore, you have to realize, if you do the toxicity testing, that there can be specific pitfalls related to the nano aspects in the sampling, but also in the readout or in the mechanism for the test. Secondly, if we look at this kind of risks, there is a series of ISO standards, biological evaluation of medical devices, which is applicable also to nanomedical devices. It provides a framework based on the type of device, the type of contact with the material, so the type of tissue that's being that's in touch with the device, and the time. And depending on the device category, there are various assays that are being offered for consideration. And there is a specific guidance document in this series related to nanomaterials under development. And I'll give you some more information on that a little bit later. As an important conclusion in that opinion, you can say that the nano-related risk is primarily related to the release of nanomaterials, so that there will be free nanomaterials in the body. That's more of a risk than nanomaterials that are, for example, as a coating attached to the device. And also you need to be aware that nanomaterials can be produced by wear processes, for example, if a hip implant, which has a lot of movement. If you go to the next slide.
Yes.
You see one of the tables that is in the scientific opinion. You see here that we have used the same kind of categorization as in the ISO standard. These are devices that are used only on the surface of the body, but it can be on intact skin or on an intact mucosal membrane or on a breached surface. So if there is a wound, and we have looked at different duration of contact, so smaller than 24 hours, up to 30 days or more than 30 days. And then we have listed a number of categories of nanomaterials. They can be free, or they can be fixed as a coating to a device. And in that case, we have made we have distinguished both the weakly attached coating and a strongly attached coating. And we also have the situation where nanomaterials can actually completely be embedded in another bulk material, and there we have distinguished between non-degradable materials, where they will stay inside, and degradable materials, where so if the surrounding material is degraded, eventually the nanomaterials that are inside will be available to the body. And we have made an estimate of the exposure of the human body to free nanomaterials. And you can see that the first entry in one of these cells is the external exposure, and the second entry is the internal exposure. And that is actually the most important one for the risk assessment. So if you see the one on the top and left, you can see a device that is used on intact skin. If it's a free nanomaterial device, but it's used at the exterior of the intact skin, there is a high external exposure, but the particles will hardly or not penetrate the human skin, so the internal exposure is negligible. So that's how you have to understand this table, and it can give you in this way an estimate of the exposure that the body will have to free nanomaterials. In the next slide,
Yes.
you see the next part of the table where so-called external communicating devices are used, so catheters or cannulas that are introduced into the body, either in contact with the blood path or with tissue or with circulating blood. We have the same kind of categories for the nanomaterial application. And in the next slide, you see that there are the implant devices, and there's a distinguishment between implants in tissue or bone and implants in blood. Well, I already explained the meaning of high and low, and the two numbers for external and internal exposure. If you look at the next slide, then we go back to the international standard. This is what you have seen in the previous slide. The categories, contact location, and contact time are important aspects to take into consideration. And then in that standard, based on the various parameters, a number of assays are offered for consideration if they have to be performed for the new particular device. And these are well-known toxicological endpoints: cytotoxicity, sensitization, irritation, and the other types which are mentioned on this slide. It's important to realize it is not a checklist, but you need to consider them all based on a risk analysis. And if there are already sufficient data, then you can use those data and do not perform new testing. In the next slide, a number of issues are mentioned that are also discussed in more detail in the guidance document, technical report 10993-22. You can see the number at the bottom of the slide. Again, me and my colleague Wim de Jong are chairing the working group that is making this document. It's actually currently under a vote. I think the deadline of the vote is very close. It's 31st of July. So after that, we will have a meeting in September, and we will go over the comments and make improvements to the document, and the document should then be published not too long after that meeting. So there will be a guidance document, and it will explain things about interference that nanomaterials can cause inside an assay. Because, for example, it can absorb the fluorescent signal that is used as a readout for specific assays. So you may have a low reading, but in fact there is an effect, but it has been absorbed. Or you may have a high reading, which is also influenced by the nanomaterials instead of by an effect of the assay. So you need to be aware of that, make sure that you have no interference. Also, basically many assays are using a chemical reaction for their mechanism, and sometimes there can be a chemical interaction with the nanomaterial that will influence the outcome of the assay. Furthermore, cell tissue culture medium can adsorb to the nanomaterials, and that can give effects. And sometimes nanomaterials are not able to enter particular cells, and the mechanism of tests is not working anymore. So this kind of things you need to be aware of when you do the safety testing of your nanomedical device. In the next slide, there's one overview, a diagram with the way you go about testing of nanomaterials. You have to start doing the characterization for the physical chemical properties, and then do the exposure assessment. For example, using the table as a guidance that I showed you earlier, the table 3. Those are just gives you the methodology. Of course, you have to do your own estimation for your own device. And then based on the outcome, you can go to phase 2, where you measure particle distribution, or phase 3, where you do the toxicological evaluation, and all based on the various outcomes of the previous step. You decide to do more or less testing, and eventually you can do your final risk assessment. And anyway, if you go to the final slide, you need to stay aware of the fact that for medical products, risks cannot always be excluded, can usually not be excluded, but you also have to consider the benefit, and the benefit should outweigh the risk. Furthermore, if you talk about doing the risk assessment and having consequences. Also, you need to be sure that you have to balance patient safety, also with the availability of innovations in general, so there will be new methods to treat patients. That's what I wanted to say about the report.
Okay, my last question, because we are in the finishing the program, is about what is the bottleneck in this kind of research?
The bottleneck, what do you mean? You mean the difficult part from science? Or,
yes, yes.
Well, I think that there are so many variables that it's complicated to do the entire range of varieties and make the right conclusions.
Okay. So, Robert, thank you so much for your contribution. I think
You're welcome.
you and your companies, your people that work with you, will produce more knowledge, more reports about this kind of development of nanotechnology. So I think we have a new opportunity in future to have your again in our program.
Yes, we will stay active in this field, and you can consult our web page rivm.nl to see if we have new results.
And maybe I send you another invitation for the next year to see more what you and your team are producing with this analysis of nanotechnology.
Certainly, if we have new interesting results, you can send me a new invitation.
Okay. Thank you so much for your contribution.
Okay.
Bye bye.
You're